The story of the Silk Road, in its most ancient whisperings, begins not with silk, nor even a road, but with the very human urge to connect, to exchange, and to wonder what lay beyond the familiar horizon. Long before empires rose and fell, before written histories chronicled the deeds of kings, our ancestors, in the deep mists of prehistory, began to forge the first faint pathways across the vast Eurasian landmass. Imagine a world where distances were measured in moons and seasons, where mountains were formidable gods, and deserts endless seas of sand. Yet even then, curiosity and necessity spurred journeys. Perhaps it was the glint of a rare stone, a shard of obsidian from a distant volcano, or the promise of a more resilient wood for a tool, that first drew nomadic bands further than their usual hunting grounds. These were not journeys of trade as we understand it today, but rather incidental exchanges, gifts, or perhaps even spoils of encounter between disparate groups. We can picture small bands, perhaps 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, during the late Stone Age, traversing nascent trails, their footsteps light upon the earth, leaving little trace for us to find today. The earliest evidence of such long-distance exchange comes from archaeological sites, where materials like Baltic amber have been found far inland, thousands of kilometers from its source, dating back to this period. How did it travel? Perhaps passed from hand to hand, tribe to tribe, across generations, each exchange a tiny thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. As millennia turned and human societies began to settle, agriculture fostered larger communities, and with them, new needs and desires. The Neolithic Revolution, roughly from 10,000 to 4,500 BCE, saw the domestication of plants and animals, leading to surplus and specialization. This era marked a significant shift. No longer were exchanges purely incidental. Now they were driven by a burgeoning understanding of resource distribution. Communities in fertile river valleys might have grain in abundance, while those in mountainous regions possessed valuable minerals or sturdy timber. The exchange of these goods, initially between neighboring settlements, gradually extended outwards, creating concentric circles of interaction. Consider the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE. The demand for copper and tin, the constituent elements of bronze, propelled prospectors and traders into remote regions. Tin, in particular, was a rare commodity, found in only a few scattered locations across Eurasia. The routes taken to transport these heavy ores were among the very first dedicated trade paths. We can almost hear the rhythmic creak of wooden carts, or the steady padding of pack animals laden with raw materials, moving through landscapes that would one day echo with the caravans of the Silk Road. The Amber Road across Europe, connecting the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean, is a well-known example of such an early, specialized route, predating the Silk Road by thousands of years. While not directly part of the later Silk Road network, it illustrates the fundamental human impulse for long-distance trade. But the early exchanges were not just about practical necessities. There was also a trade in ideas, in technologies, and in culture. The spread of agricultural techniques, the domestication of horses, the invention of the wheel, and the development of metallurgy, these transformative innovations did not arise in isolation. They traveled along these nascent pathways, carried by migrants, warriors, and the very first merchants. The diffusion of pottery styles, for instance, across vast distances, offers tantalizing clues to these early cultural highways. A particular decorative motif found in a settlement near the Black Sea might, centuries later, appear in a modified form in a distant village in Central Asia. A silent testament to ancient connections. One of the most fascinating and still debated aspects of the early period is the question of the domestication of the horse and its role in opening up the steppes. Around 3500 BCE, in the Pontic-Caspian steppe, a vast grassland stretching from modern-day Ukraine to Kazakhstan, evidence suggests that horses were first domesticated. This was a game-changer. Suddenly, travel became faster, burdens could be carried more efficiently, and vast distances could be covered with unprecedented speed. The nomadic peoples of the steppe, with their newfound equestrian skills, became pivotal intermediaries in the flow of goods and ideas between the settled agricultural civilizations to their east and west. They were not merely obstacles or raiders. They were crucial facilitators of early trans-Eurasian interactions. Historians still disagree on the precise timeline and cultural origins of horse domestication, with some arguing for multiple independent domestication events, while others point to a single origin point. Regardless, its impact on early connectivity cannot be overstated. As we move closer to the dawn of recorded history, around 2000 BCE, the complexity of these interactions deepened. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, engaged in maritime trade with Mesopotamia. Seals from the Indus cities have been found in Sumerian archaeological sites, indicating a vibrant exchange of goods like textiles, precious stones, and perhaps even ideas. While primarily sea-based, these routes connected to overland paths, creating a multimodal network. Similarly, the early Chinese civilizations, though often depicted as isolated, were far from it. Archaeological discoveries have shown interactions with steppe cultures and even faint echoes of Western influence long before the Han dynasty. Jade, a highly prized material in ancient China, often originated from distant mines in Central Asia, suggesting established, if informal, routes for its acquisition. The mystery of the Tarim mummies, discovered in the arid Tarim Basin of Xinjiang, China, offers another compelling glimpse into these early connections. Dating back to as early as 1800 BCE, these remarkably preserved bodies exhibit distinctly European features and are clothed in textiles woven with complex patterns, some remarkably similar to Celtic designs from much later periods in Europe. Their presence in the heart of Central Asia, thousands of kilometers from any known European population, raises profound questions about ancient migrations, cultural diffusion, and the very nature of early trans-Eurasian contact. Were they traders, migrants, or perhaps a lost branch of a forgotten people who simply settled in this harsh yet strategically located basin? The debate continues, adding layers of intrigue to the story of these ancient pathways. By the time the great empires of antiquity began to solidify their power, the Assyrians, the Persians, and later the Greeks and Romans in the west, the Zhang and Zhao dynasties in the east, the foundations for a more structured network were already in place. These empires, with their vast resources and organized administrations, began to exert control over certain segments of these ancient trails, sometimes for military purposes, sometimes for tribute, and increasingly for trade. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, which stretched from Greece to India by the 5th century BCE, established the Royal Road, a sophisticated system of post stations and garrisons designed for rapid communication and troop movement. While primarily an administrative and military artery, it undoubtedly facilitated commercial traffic, connecting the disparate parts of their vast dominion. This was a road in a more formal sense, though still far from the comprehensive network that would later be known as the Silk Road. The early exchanges were not always peaceful. Raids and conflicts were as much a part of the landscape as trade. Yet even in conflict, there was interaction, an exchange of technologies, strategies, and sometimes even captives who would carry their knowledge to new lands. The movement of domesticated animals, such as sheep and goats, across Eurasia is another testament to these early, often unrecorded interactions. Genetic studies have shown complex patterns of diffusion, suggesting multiple waves of migration and exchange over thousands of years. These initial fragmented paths, these whispers of connection across an immense continent, laid the groundwork for everything that was to follow. They were the capillaries before the arteries, the scattered seeds before the forest. They taught humanity the possibility of reaching beyond the immediate, of finding value in the distant, and of the profound transformations that occur when cultures meet. The sheer human resilience required to traverse these early routes, often with rudimentary tools and little knowledge of what lay ahead, speaks to an indomitable spirit of exploration and enterprise. Perhaps these ancient trails, winding through mountains and across deserts, truly whispered stories to the stars, long before anyone thought to write them down. The scent of wood smoke from a nomadic camp, the distant cry of a wild animal, the feel of wind-blown sand against the skin. These were the sensory experiences of the pioneers who unknowingly were sketching the first outlines of the greatest trade network the world would ever know. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. The desert winds, so often a relentless sculptor of dunes and rock, now carried whispers of possibility across the vast stretches of the Han Empire. For centuries, China had looked inward. Its formidable natural barriers, the towering Himalayas, the impassable Gobi, the boundless Pacific, fostering a sense of self-sufficiency, a belief in its own centrality. Yet, beyond these natural walls, beyond the familiar rhythms of the Yellow River and the Yangtze, lay a world largely unknown, a world that would soon be drawn into China's orbit through an unexpected catalyst, a quest for allies against a common foe. The year was approximately 139 BCE, and Emperor Wu, a man of immense ambition and strategic foresight, sat on the dragon throne. His reign, one of the longest and most impactful in Chinese history, would see the Han dynasty reach its zenith, expanding its borders and consolidating its power. But a persistent thorn in his side, a constant threat to the northern frontiers, was the Xiongnu, a formidable confederation of nomadic tribes. Their swift cavalry raids were a perpetual menace, disrupting trade, plundering settlements, and challenging the very stability of the Han state. Emperor Wu, seeking a decisive solution, learned of a distant people, the Yaoshi, who had once been powerful rivals of the Xiongnu before being driven westward. Perhaps, he mused, an alliance could be forged, a pincer movement that would finally break the Xiongnu's strength. This audacious vision required an equally audacious messenger, a man willing to venture into the unknown, to cross deserts and mountains where Han influence ended and legend began. That man was Zhang Qian, a court official of unwavering courage and keen intellect. His mission was unprecedented: to journey to the western regions, to locate the Yoshi, and to persuade them to join forces with the Han against their mutual enemy. It was a diplomatic endeavor, fraught with peril, a journey into lands where the very concept of the Han Empire was likely unknown, where different languages, customs, and dangers awaited at every turn. Zhang Qian set out with a retinue of 100 men, including an interpreter named Ganfu and a number of guides. Their initial route led them northwest, past the last Han garrisons, into the vast emptiness of the Gobi. The sun beat down mercilessly, the sands stretched endlessly, and the silence of the desert was broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the murmur of the wind. But the greatest danger was not the elements, it was the Xiongnu themselves. Zhang Qian's party was intercepted, captured, and held prisoner for over a decade. Imagine the despair, the slow erosion of hope, as years turned into a decade, as the mission seemed utterly lost. During his captivity, Zhang Qian was forced to marry a Xiongnu woman and had a child, integrating, to some extent, into their nomadic life. Yet his resolve never wavered. He learned their language, observed their customs, and crucially, gathered invaluable intelligence about the lands beyond the Xiongnu territories. After more than 10 years, Zhang Qian, seizing an opportune moment of lax security, managed to escape with his wife, child, and a handful of loyal followers. His determination to complete his original mission was astounding. He continued westward, guided by the knowledge he had gleaned during his captivity. He eventually reached the Fergana Valley, a fertile oasis kingdom known to the Chinese as Daiwan. Here, he encountered magnificent horses, larger and swifter than any known in China, the fabled heavenly horses that would later become a coveted commodity. The king of Daiwan, intrigued by this envoy from a distant, powerful empire, welcomed Zhang Qian and provided him with guides to continue his journey. From Daiwan, Zhang Qian traveled further, eventually reaching the land of the Yoshi. But here, his primary mission met with disappointment. The Yoshi, having settled comfortably in their new lands and prospered, had lost their appetite for war against the Xiongnu. They were content with their present circumstances and saw no benefit in reigniting old conflicts. Despite this diplomatic setback, Zhang Qian did not consider his journey a failure. He spent a year among the Yuezhi, observing their culture, their agricultural practices, and their trade networks. He learned of other kingdoms further west, of Daxia, Bactria, a land of settled farmers and sophisticated cities, and even of Chengdu, India, a land of elephants and bustling markets, whose goods reached Bactria through overland routes. He saw evidence of goods from distant lands, goods that had travelled across vast distances, hinting at an interconnected world far beyond China's borders. On his return journey, Zhang Qian faced renewed dangers. He was once again captured by the Xiongnu, though for a shorter period this time. He eventually escaped again, and after 13 arduous years, he finally returned to Chang'an, the Han capital, in approximately 126 BCE. Of his original 100-man retinue, only Zhang Qian and Ganfu survived. His report to Emperor Wu was a revelation. While he had failed to secure the alliance with the Yuezhi, the wealth of information he brought back was immeasurable. He described new peoples, new animals, new plants, and most importantly, new trade routes. He spoke of sophisticated kingdoms to the west, of their desire for Chinese silk, and of the potential for a grand exchange of goods and ideas. Zhang Qian's expeditions, often referred to as the opening of the Western regions, fundamentally altered China's perception of the world. Before his journeys, the Han court had a limited understanding of the lands beyond its immediate neighbors. After his reports, a detailed, albeit still incomplete, map of the known world began to form. He described the Fergana horses, inspiring Emperor Wu's later campaigns to acquire them, recognizing their military value. He spoke of alfalfa and grapes, plants previously unknown in China, which would eventually be introduced and cultivated, enriching Chinese agriculture. He detailed the intricate network of trade that already existed, a nascent web of routes that would soon be consolidated and expanded under Han patronage. The information Zhang Qian brought back was not merely academic. It had profound strategic implications. Emperor Wu, now armed with a clearer understanding of the Western regions, began to implement policies aimed at extending Han influence. Garrisons were established along the newly charted routes, oases were secured, and diplomatic missions followed in Zhang Qian's footsteps. This was not a sudden, singular event, but a gradual process, a slow unfolding of Han power and presence. The establishment of these outposts and the protection offered to merchants were crucial steps in transforming disparate paths into a more organized and safer thoroughfare, what we now call the Silk Road. Historians still debate the precise extent to which Zhang Qian discovered the Silk Road. It is clear that trade in various forms had existed between East and West for centuries before his journeys. Small-scale exchanges of goods passed from one nomadic tribe to another, from one oasis town to the next, were undoubtedly taking place. Archaeological evidence, such as Chinese silk fragments found in Iron Age European tombs dating back to before Zhang Qian, suggests that some form of indirect exchange was already occurring. Perhaps these early threads of silk, carried westward by unknown hands, were the first whispers of the great network to come. However, Zhang Qian's significance lies not in discovering an existing path, but in systematically exploring, documenting, and officially opening these routes for the Han Empire. He provided the strategic intelligence and the impetus for China to actively engage with the Western regions. His expeditions transformed sporadic, unofficial exchanges into a formalized, state-sponsored network of trade and diplomacy. He brought back not just goods, but knowledge of geography, cultures, and political landscapes that was essential for the Han dynasty to project its power and influence beyond its traditional borders. Following Zhang Qian's initial journey, he embarked on a second, shorter mission around 119-115 BCE, primarily to solidify relations with the Wusun, another nomadic group, and to encourage them to move eastward to serve as a buffer against the Xiongnu. While this mission also had limited success in its primary objective, it further deepened Han understanding of the region and reinforced the importance of continuous engagement. These diplomatic forays, backed by military expeditions when necessary, gradually extended Han control and established a chain of commanderies and garrisons along the key routes. The Han dynasty's expansion westward was driven by a complex interplay of factors: the persistent threat of the Xiongnu, the desire for exotic goods like the heavenly horses of Fergana, and the sheer ambition of Emperor Wu. But it was Zhang Qian's courage, his resilience, and his meticulous observations that provided the foundational knowledge upon which this expansion was built. His journey was a testament to human curiosity, to the drive to explore beyond the horizon, and to the enduring power of a single individual to reshape the course of history. Imagine the bustling scene in Chang'an as news of Zhang Qian's return spread. The emperor, eager to hear of distant lands, the court officials, curious about new peoples, and the merchants, their minds already turning to the possibilities of new markets. The tales Zhang Qian spun must have been mesmerizing. Stories of cities built of brick and stone, unlike the wooden structures of China. Of people with deep-set eyes and prominent noses. Of strange animals and exotic fruits. These stories ignited the imagination and fueled the desire for connection. The systematic exchange that followed Zhang Qian's expeditions was not merely about goods. It was a conduit for ideas, technologies, and cultures. Chinese silk, renowned for its luxurious texture and vibrant dyes, became a highly coveted commodity in the West. In return, China received not only the prized Fergana horses, but also new agricultural products like grapes, alfalfa, walnuts, and pomegranates. Skilled artisans and craftsmen from the West brought new techniques and artistic styles, influencing Chinese art and craftsmanship. Buddhism, originating in India, would eventually travel along these very routes, profoundly shaping Chinese philosophy, art, and society. The establishment of the Silk Road under the Han Dynasty was a monumental undertaking, a testament to organizational prowess and strategic vision. It required the construction of watchtowers and fortifications to protect caravans from bandits and nomadic raiders. Oases, vital watering holes and resting places were developed into thriving trade hubs. A network of messengers and officials ensured communication and maintained order across vast distances. This was not a single road, but a complex web of interconnected routes, constantly shifting and adapting to political changes, environmental conditions, and the demands of trade. The very name Silk Road, coined much later in the 19th century by the German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen, perfectly captures the essence of this exchange, highlighting the most iconic commodity that travelled along its paths. But it was far more than just silk. It was a circulatory system, pumping lifeblood, goods, ideas, people across the Eurasian landmass, connecting civilizations that had once existed in relative isolation. The legacy of Zhang Qian's expeditions is profound. He was the pioneer, the trailblazer, who through sheer force of will and intellect pushed the boundaries of the known world and laid the groundwork for centuries of unprecedented cross-cultural interaction. His journeys transformed China from an inward-looking empire into a central player on a global stage, initiating a systematic exchange that would shape the destinies of countless peoples and profoundly influence the course of human history. The winds that once carried whispers now carried the rustle of silk, the clatter of camel hooves, and the murmur of 1,000 languages, all converging on the paths that Zhang Qian had so courageously opened. The world was becoming interconnected, one caravan at a time, one intrepid journey after another. The winds of change, once a gentle breeze, now swelled into a powerful current, carrying not just goods, but entire ways of life across the vast expanses of Asia and beyond. This was the true dawn of the Silk Road's golden age, a period where the threads of commerce wove a tapestry of unprecedented cultural exchange, transforming isolated communities into interconnected civilizations. The Han dynasty, having established a fragile but functioning peace, had inadvertently opened a Pandora's box of opportunity, and what spilled forth was a vibrant, often chaotic, but undeniably enriching era of global interaction. Imagine the bustling markets of Chang'an, the Han capital, in the 2nd century BCE. The air, thick with the scent of exotic spices and the chatter of a dozen different languages, was a testament to the burgeoning trade. Here, Han silks, renowned for their shimmering beauty and delicate weave, were exchanged for sturdy Central Asian horses, essential for cavalry and transport. These weren't just any horses. These were the legendary heavenly horses of Fergana, famed for their strength and speed. A far cry from the smaller ponies the Han had previously relied upon. The desire for these magnificent steeds was so great that it fueled early Han expeditions into the West, driven by a strategic need as much as a commercial one. The Han Emperor Wu, in particular, was obsessed with acquiring these horses, even launching military campaigns to secure access to them, demonstrating how deeply intertwined trade and imperial ambition had become. But the flow wasn't unidirectional. With the horses came new crops like alfalfa, vital for feeding the steeds, and grapes, which eventually led to the introduction of winemaking techniques in China. From India, Buddhism began its slow, transformative journey along these very routes, carried by monks and merchants alike. Imagine the sight of a Buddhist monk robed in saffron, meditating by a desert oasis, his teachings slowly seeping into the local communities, perhaps even influencing the design of a caravanserai or the carvings on a cave temple. The Parthian Empire, straddling the crucial land bridge between East and West, played a pivotal role in this exchange. Their control over the lucrative trade routes meant they were often the middlemen, facilitating the flow of goods and ideas, while also imposing their own taxes and regulations. They were masters of horseback archery, their feared cataphracts, heavily armoured cavalry, a formidable force that ensured the safety, or at least the respect, of their trading partners. The Parthians, though often viewed as a barrier by the Romans, were in fact essential conduits, their empire a vibrant crossroads where Hellenistic, Persian, and nomadic cultures intermingled. It was through their lands that Roman glass and precious metals made their way eastward, and Chinese silk flowed westward, often reaching the Mediterranean world in such quantities that Roman moralists decried the drain of gold from the empire. The Roman Empire, at its zenith, became a voracious consumer of these Eastern luxuries. Silk, in particular, was highly prized, a symbol of status and wealth. Roman authors like Pliny the Elder lamented the vast sums spent on silk, noting that it was imported from the Ceres, the Silk People, a distant and mysterious land. He even described how silk was rewoven in places like the island of Kos to make it more translucent, further enhancing its exotic allure. Imagine a Roman senator draped in a toga of shimmering silk, the fabric whispering tales of distant lands and arduous journeys, a stark contrast to the rough wool of local garments. This demand created an economic pull that stretched across continents, connecting the Mediterranean to the heart of Asia. Yet the journey itself was fraught with peril. Deserts, mountains, and vast steppes presented immense challenges. Caravans, often comprising hundreds of camels and dozens of merchants, would traverse these routes for months, sometimes even years. Each journey was an epic undertaking, a testament to human endurance and entrepreneurial spirit. Bandits lurked in mountain passes, Sandstorms could erase landmarks in an instant, and the harsh elements tested the limits of both man and beast. The caravanserai, those fortified inns scattered along the routes, became vital havens, offering shelter, water, and protection. They were more than just rest stops. They were miniature melting pots where merchants from different cultures shared stories, exchanged information, and perhaps even brokered new deals under the starlit desert sky. The Qian Empire, emerging in Central Asia around the 1st century CE, became another powerful nexus in this golden age. Located at the crossroads of Indian, Chinese, Persian, and Roman influences, the Kushans embraced a syncretic culture, blending elements from each. Their coinage often featured images of Buddhist deities alongside Greek and Zoroastrian gods, a tangible representation of the cultural fusion taking place. Under their patronage, Buddhism flourished, and the Gandhara school of art, with its distinctive Greco-Buddhist style, emerged. Imagine a Buddha statue with classical Greek drapery and facial features, a startling yet beautiful synthesis of two distinct artistic traditions, a direct result of the cultural currents flowing along the Silk Road. This empire, though less known than the Han or Roman, was a crucial link, facilitating the spread of Buddhism into China and providing a safe passage for goods moving between India and the West. The maritime routes, though often overshadowed by the land-based Silk Road, also began to flourish during this period, particularly in the Indian Ocean. Monsoon winds, once understood, became reliable allies, propelling ships laden with spices, textiles, and precious stones between India, Southeast Asia, and the Arabian Peninsula. Imagine the sight of a dhow, its triangular lateen sail billowing in the monsoon, navigating the azure waters, its hold filled with cinnamon, cloves, and pepper, destined for distant markets. These sea lanes, sometimes referred to as the spice routes, complemented the land routes, offering an alternative for bulkier goods and providing a different set of connections. Historians still debate the exact extent to which the maritime routes competed with or complemented the land routes during this early period. Was it a rivalry for supremacy, or a symbiotic relationship where each route served different needs and different types of cargo? The answer likely lies in a complex interplay of factors, including political stability, technological advancements in shipbuilding, and the ever-shifting demands of the market. One fascinating, lesser-known detail from this era is the story of the Sogdians. These Iranian people, based in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, became the undisputed masters of Silk Road trade from the 4th to the 8th centuries CE. Not empire builders in the traditional sense, but rather a network of highly skilled merchants, linguists, and cultural intermediaries. They established trading colonies across Central Asia and even into China, acting as vital bridges between diverse cultures. Imagine a Sogdian merchant, fluent in several languages, negotiating a deal between a Chinese official and a nomadic chieftain, his keen understanding of both cultures allowing him to navigate complex social protocols and secure favorable terms. Their multilingualism and adaptability made them indispensable, and their distinctive culture, blending Persian and Central Asian elements, left a lasting mark on the art and architecture of the regions they traversed. Their influence was so pervasive that Sogdian became a lingua franca of the Silk Road for centuries, a testament to their commercial prowess. The spread of technologies was another profound impact of this golden age. Paper, invented in China, slowly made its way westward, revolutionizing record-keeping and facilitating the dissemination of knowledge. Imagine the laborious process of writing on bamboo strips or silk, suddenly replaced by the smooth surface of paper, making books more accessible and ideas more mobile. Gunpowder, another Chinese invention, would follow a similar trajectory centuries later, fundamentally altering the nature of warfare. Agricultural innovations, such as new irrigation techniques and drought-resistant crops, also traveled along these routes, enhancing food security and supporting growing populations in various regions. The very concept of a world began to take shape during this period, albeit a fragmented one. People in Rome might have heard whispers of a distant land of silk, while those in Chang'an might have marveled at the exotic goods from Qian, the Roman Empire. These were not mere curiosities. They were tangible links, threads connecting disparate civilizations and fostering a nascent sense of global awareness. The Silk Road, in essence, was not just a path for goods, but a conduit for dreams, fears, and aspirations, a grand experiment in human interconnectedness. However, this golden age was not without its shadows. The very routes that carried wealth and knowledge also facilitated the spread of diseases. Plagues carried by merchants and their caravans could devastate populations, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and disruption. The Antonine Plague, which ravaged the Roman Empire in the 2nd century CE, is thought by some historians to have originated in the East and travelled westward along these very trade networks, though its precise origin remains a subject of scholarly debate. Did the plague originate in China or perhaps Central Asia, carried by the very goods that brought prosperity? The lack of definitive records makes it difficult to pinpoint the exact source, but the interconnectedness of the world, even then, meant that a disease in one region could quickly become a global catastrophe. The rise and fall of empires also profoundly impacted the Silk Road. When powerful empires like the Han, Parthian, and later the Sasanian and Byzantine empires were strong and stable, they provided a relatively secure environment for trade. They maintained roads, policed borders, and offered protection to caravans. But when these empires weakened, internal strife and external invasions could disrupt trade, making journeys perilous and increasing the cost of goods. The ebb and flow of political power directly correlated with the prosperity of the Silk Road. A period of peace meant open routes and flourishing markets. A period of conflict meant closed borders and dangerous journeys. Yet despite these challenges, the allure of the Silk Road remained irresistible. The promise of immense wealth, the thrill of discovery, and the desire for exotic goods continued to draw merchants, adventurers, and scholars to its winding paths. The cultural fusion that occurred during this golden age was profound and enduring, shaping the art, religions, languages, and technologies of countless civilizations. The Silk Road was more than just a series of trade routes. It was a dynamic, living network, constantly evolving, constantly adapting, and constantly weaving new threads into the grand tapestry of human history. It was a testament to the insatiable human desire to connect, to explore, and to exchange, leaving an indelible mark on the world that continues to resonate even today. The Silk Road, a network of arteries across continents, carried more than just shimmering silks and fragrant spices. It was a conduit for the human spirit itself, a grand highway for ideas and beliefs to travel, to take root, and to transform entire civilizations. Among these intangible treasures, none perhaps had a more profound impact than Buddhism, a philosophy born in the fertile plains of ancient India. Its journey eastward, from its birthplace to the heart of China and beyond, is a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the silent, persistent spread of faith. Imagine, if you will, the early Buddhist monks, their robes rustling in the desert wind, their minds filled with teachings of compassion and enlightenment. They were not merchants driven by profit, but pilgrims propelled by a spiritual quest. They walked for months, sometimes years, across treacherous mountain passes and vast, shimmering deserts, their footsteps tracing paths already worn by countless caravans. Their monasteries, often carved into cliff faces or built as oases in the wilderness, became vital waypoints along the Silk Road, offering not only spiritual solace but also practical refuge to weary travelers. These monastic communities, like the famous caves of Dunhuang, served as centers of learning, art, and medicine, fostering a vibrant cultural exchange that transcended mere commerce. The earliest reliable evidence of Buddhism reaching China dates to the 1st century CE, during the Han dynasty. Legend speaks of Emperor Ming dreaming of a golden deity, leading him to send envoys westward, who returned with Buddhist scriptures and 2 Indian monks. While the specifics of this tale are debated, archaeological findings, such as Buddhist artifacts discovered in tombs from the Eastern Han period, confirm its presence. For instance, a gilded bronze Buddha statue, unearthed in a tomb near Pengshan, Sichuan province, dated to around 200 CE, offers tangible proof of the religion's early arrival. This initial encounter, however, was a slow and gradual process. The sophisticated philosophical traditions of China, particularly Confucianism and Taoism, were deeply entrenched, and Buddhism, with its foreign concepts of reincarnation and monasticism, initially seemed alien. The true acceleration of Buddhism's spread occurred during a period of immense upheaval in China, following the collapse of the Han dynasty in 220 CE. The ensuing centuries were marked by political fragmentation, warfare, and social unrest. In this turbulent landscape, the promise of an end to suffering, of a path to inner peace, offered by Buddhist teachings, resonated deeply with a populace yearning for solace and stability. Many Chinese scholars and aristocrats, disillusioned with the prevailing philosophies, found in Buddhism a fresh intellectual and spiritual challenge. They began to translate the voluminous Sanskrit scriptures into Chinese, a monumental undertaking that required immense linguistic and philosophical skill. This process was not merely a literal translation. It involved adapting complex Indian concepts to Chinese thought, often using Taoist terminology to bridge the cultural gap. This period of intense translation and interpretation, particularly during the Northern and Southern dynasties, 420 to 589 CE, was crucial in naturalizing Buddhism into the Chinese cultural fabric. One of the most significant figures in this translation effort was Kumarajiva, a monk of Qian and Indian descent, who arrived in China in the early 5th century. His translations, known for their clarity and elegance, were instrumental in making Buddhist texts accessible to a wider Chinese audience. He established a translation bureau in Chang'an, the imperial capital, where he worked with hundreds of scholars, meticulously rendering Sanskrit sutras into Chinese. His work, particularly on texts like the Lotus Sutra and the Diamond Sutra, profoundly shaped Chinese Buddhist thought and practice. Historians still debate the exact extent to which Kuberajiva's translations may have subtly altered the original meanings to better suit Chinese sensibilities, a fascinating interplay between linguistic fidelity and cultural adaptation. Did he, for example, emphasize certain aspects over others to make the teachings more palatable to a Confucian-influenced society? The nuances of this intellectual exchange continue to be a rich area of scholarly inquiry. The physical manifestation of Buddhism's eastward journey is perhaps nowhere more breathtaking than in the cave temples that dot the Silk Road. The Mogao grottos near Dongwang, for instance, are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. A sprawling complex of nearly 500 caves adorned with exquisite murals and sculptures depicting Buddhist narratives, celestial beings, and everyday life. These caves, begun in the 4th century and continuously expanded for over a millennium, served as a repository of Buddhist art, literature, and history. Imagine the painstaking labor involved in carving these intricate spaces out of solid rock, the vibrant pigments painstakingly applied to create scenes that shimmered in the flickering lamplight. Each mural tells a story, each sculpture embodies a spiritual ideal, offering a visual encyclopedia of Buddhist cosmology and practice. These sites were not merely places of worship. They were cultural crossroads where different artistic styles and religious traditions converged, creating a unique synthesis. The spread of Buddhism was not a unidirectional flow. As it moved eastward, it absorbed and integrated local traditions, transforming itself in the process. In China, it gave rise to distinct schools of thought, such as Qian Buddhism, which later became Zen in Japan, which emphasized meditation and direct experience over scriptural study. The syncretic nature of Chinese Buddhism, often blending with Taoist and Confucian elements, demonstrates its remarkable adaptability. For instance, the concept of filial piety, central to Confucianism, found its way into Buddhist teachings, with sutras being composed that emphasized the importance of caring for one's parents. This ability to adapt and integrate was a key factor in its enduring success. From China, Buddhism continued its journey to Korea and Japan, carried by monks, scholars, and artisans. In Korea, it arrived in the late 4th century, initially embraced by the ruling elite and later spreading to the general populace. The construction of magnificent temples like Bulguksa and Sokgoram Grotto in Gyeongju, dating from the 8th century, attests to the profound influence of Buddhism on Korean art and architecture. These structures, with their intricate stone carvings and serene Buddha images, reflect a unique blend of indigenous Korean aesthetics and Buddhist principles. Japan, in turn, received Buddhism primarily through Korea in the 6th century. The arrival of Buddhist scriptures, statues, and monks from the Korean kingdom of Baekje marked a pivotal moment in Japanese history. Prince Shotoku, a revered regent of the early 7th century, became a fervent patron of Buddhism, promoting its teachings and encouraging the construction of temples. The Horyuji temple complex near Nara, established in the early 7th century, is one of the oldest wooden structures in the world and a testament to the early flourishing of Buddhism in Japan. Its architectural style, influenced by continental models, yet distinctly Japanese, beautifully illustrates the adaptive nature of this spiritual journey. The impact of Buddhism on these Eastern societies was multifaceted and profound. It introduced new philosophical concepts, ethical frameworks, and artistic forms. It stimulated the development of printing technology as a means of disseminating scriptures. It fostered literacy and education, as monasteries became centers of learning. It influenced governance and law, with Buddhist principles of compassion and justice finding our way into imperial decrees. Perhaps these silent monasteries, nestled in mountain passes or towering above bustling cities, whispered stories of peace and enlightenment to generations, shaping the very soul of these nations. Consider the sheer volume of intellectual and artistic output inspired by Buddhism along the Silk Road. Thousands upon thousands of scriptures translated, millions of images painted and sculpted, countless temples and pagodas erected. The cultural landscape of Asia would be utterly unrecognizable without the pervasive influence of Buddhism. It's a journey that speaks not of conquest, but of quiet persuasion, of ideas finding fertile ground in new lands. The enduring appeal of its core tenets, the pursuit of wisdom, compassion, and the alleviation of suffering, transcended cultural and linguistic barriers, allowing it to resonate with diverse peoples across vast distances. The legacy of this eastward journey is still visible today, from the serene temples nestled in Japanese mountains to the vibrant murals of Dunhuang. The Silk Road, in its capacity as a spiritual conduit, facilitated one of the most significant cultural transformations in human history. It reminds us that trade routes are not merely economic arteries, they are also pathways for the most profound human expressions, for beliefs that can reshape entire civilizations, leaving an indelible mark on the tapestry of human experience. The rustle of a monk's robe, the scent of incense in a cave temple, the quiet contemplation of a scholar translating ancient texts. These were the subtle yet powerful forces that propelled Buddhism across continents, a testament to the enduring human quest for meaning and enlightenment. The desert wind, a constant sculptor of dunes, carried more than just sand across the vast expanse of Central Asia. It carried whispers of burgeoning empires, the clash of distant armies, and the rhythmic creak of caravan wheels. As the Han dynasty's grip on the western regions began to loosen, a new tapestry of power unfurled across the Eurasian landmass, each thread woven with ambition, conquest, and an insatiable desire for the riches that flowed along the Silk Road. The decline of the Han, marked by internal strife and the rise of powerful warlords in the early 3rd century CE, created a power vacuum that reverberated across the trade routes. No longer was there a single dominant patron ensuring the safety and stability of the entire network. Instead, the Silk Road splintered into a series of smaller, more localized arteries, each controlled by emerging regional powers. This fragmentation, surprisingly, did not halt the flow of goods. Rather, it diversified it, as new players sought to carve out their own share of the lucrative trade. To the west, the Sasanian Empire, rising from the ashes of the Parthians in 224 CE, became a formidable force. Their capital, Ctesiphon, on the Tigris River, was a city of immense splendor, a testament to their wealth and power. The Sasanians, a Persian dynasty, were shrewd administrators and fierce warriors. They controlled key segments of the Silk Road through Mesopotamia and Persia, acting as vital intermediaries between the Roman world and the East. Their passion for silk was legendary. Sasanian kings and nobles adorned themselves in garments of unparalleled luxury, often commissioning unique designs that blended Persian motifs with Chinese techniques. This artistic fusion, visible in surviving textiles from the period, speaks to the deep cultural exchange fostered by trade. The Romans, ever eager for exotic luxuries, continued to be a major consumer of silk, despite their ongoing rivalry with the Sasanians. The two empires frequently clashed over border territories and influence. Yet the demand for silk, spices, and other Eastern goods often transcended political animosity. Merchants, ever resourceful, navigated these complex geopolitical landscapes, finding alternative routes or paying hefty tolls to pass through contested zones. It's a fascinating testament to the power of commerce that even amidst perpetual warfare, the threads of trade remained largely unbroken. Meanwhile, in the East, the Han's fall ushered in a period known as the Three Kingdoms, followed by centuries of disunity and shifting dynasties. Despite this political turmoil, the northern steppes saw the rise of nomadic confederations like the Xiongnu and later the Gugturks. These formidable horsemen, often portrayed as mere raiders, were also crucial participants in the Silk Road economy. They controlled vast swathes of Central Asia, demanding tribute and offering protection or threat of attack to caravans. Their nomadic lifestyle, far from being primitive, was highly sophisticated, allowing them to adapt quickly to changing conditions and exploit the resources of the steppe. They traded horses, furs, and livestock for silk, grain, and manufactured goods from agricultural societies. One lesser-known detail from this era is the significant role played by the Sogdians. Hailing from the region around Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan, these Iranian-speaking people became the undisputed masters of Silk Road trade during the early medieval period. They were not an empire in the traditional sense, but a network of independent city-states whose citizens were renowned for their linguistic skills, entrepreneurial spirit, and ability to navigate diverse cultures. Sogdian merchants established trading colonies as far east as China and as far west as Byzantium, acting as cultural and economic bridges. They adopted various scripts, including Aramaic and later their own Sogdian script, to record their transactions and communicate. Actions. Their frescoes, found in places like Panjikent, depict a vibrant, cosmopolitan society, showcasing their love for music, dance, and fine clothing, all influenced by their extensive travels. Historians still debate the extent of their political influence versus their purely economic dominance. Were they truly independent, or did they always operate under the shadow of larger empires? Regardless, their impact on the flow of goods and ideas was profound. The Silk Road, during this period of fragmented empires, became less a single highway and more a complex web of interconnected routes, each adapting to the prevailing political winds. New oases rose to prominence, while others faded. The rise of Buddhism, originating in India, found fertile ground along these routes. Sogdian merchants, among others, were instrumental in its transmission to China, carrying not just scrolls, but also the spiritual teachings and artistic traditions. Buddhist monasteries, often built along trade routes, offered respite and spiritual solace to weary travelers, becoming centers of learning and cultural exchange. The caves of Dunhuang, with their breathtaking murals and thousands of Buddhist manuscripts, stand as a monumental testament to this spiritual journey. The 7th century CE brought another seismic shift with the rapid expansion of Islam. From its origins in the Arabian Peninsula, the Islamic Caliphate swept across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Central Asia, eventually clashing with the Chinese Tang dynasty at the Battle of Talas in 751 CE. This battle, though strategically indecisive in terms of territorial gains, had profound cultural consequences. It is often cited as the point at which paper-making technology, a closely guarded Chinese secret, was transmitted to the Islamic world. Captured Chinese craftsmen, it is said, revealed their techniques, leading to the establishment of paper mills in Samarkand and Baghdad. This innovation revolutionized record-keeping, scholarship, and communication across the Islamic world and eventually Europe. The Islamic Golden Age, spanning roughly from the 8th to the 13th centuries, saw the Silk Road flourish under a new, unifying power. The Abbasid Caliphate, centered in Baghdad, became a beacon of learning and trade. Islamic scholars absorbed knowledge from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions, translating and expanding upon them. Arabic became the lingua franca of commerce and scholarship across vast swathes of the Silk Road. Merchants from Baghdad traveled to China, and Chinese goods, including porcelain and silk, were highly prized in the Islamic world. The unified legal framework and relative stability offered by the Caliphate facilitated trade, making journeys safer and more predictable. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire, also played a crucial role. With its capital at Constantinople, a strategic crossroads between East and West, Byzantium was a major consumer and, eventually, a producer of silk. Initially, they relied entirely on imports from China and Persia. But in the 6th century, a remarkable event occurred. According to historical accounts, 2 Nestorian monks, acting on behalf of Emperor Justinian I, smuggled silkworm eggs out of China, hidden in hollowed-out bamboo canes. This audacious act, if true, allowed Byzantium to establish its own silk industry, breaking the Chinese monopoly and further diversifying the global silk trade. This event, while widely accepted, still sparks some scholarly debate about the exact details and whether the monks truly originated from China, or rather from a region where sericulture had already spread. Regardless of the precise origin of the eggs, the establishment of a Byzantine silk industry was a game-changer, demonstrating the lengths to which empires would go to secure valuable resources. The Silk Road, during this period, was not just about goods, it was a conduit for technologies, religions, and artistic style. Persian miniature painting, with its vibrant colors and intricate details, influenced Chinese art, just as Chinese porcelain techniques found their way to Persia. The development of new navigation tools, advanced shipbuilding techniques, and sophisticated financial instruments like bills of exchange all traveled along these routes, facilitating ever more complex transactions. The concept of a caravanserai, roadside inns offering lodging, food, and security for merchants and their animals, became a ubiquitous feature across the Islamic lands, further cementing the infrastructure of trade. These bustling hubs were not merely places to rest. They were melting pots of cultures, where languages mingled, stories were exchanged, and deals were struck under the starry desert sky. Consider the journey of a single bolt of Chinese silk during this time. It might begin its life in a mulberry grove in Sichuan, its fibers spun and woven by skilled artisans. From there, it would be packed onto the back of a camel, joining a caravan destined for the Western markets. It would traverse the scorching Taklamakan desert, passing through Buddhist monasteries carved into cliff faces, where monks might offer blessings for a safe journey. It would then cross the formidable Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world, where the air was thin and the cold biting. Descending into the fertile Fergana Valley, it might be traded to a Sogdian merchant, who would then carry it through the lands of the Sasanian Empire, past fire temples and Zoroastrian communities. Finally, it could reach the bustling markets of Baghdad or Damascus. where it might be purchased by an Arab merchant and shipped across the Mediterranean to Constantinople, eventually adorning a Byzantine empress or a European noble. Each leg of this journey involved different languages, different currencies, different customs, and different dangers. Yet the desire for the silk, its shimmering beauty and exotic allure, propelled it forward. The Silk Road was also a military highway. Empires used these routes to project power, move armies, and establish garrisons. The Chinese, the Sasanians, the Byzantines, and later the Islamic caliphates all understood the strategic importance of controlling key passes and oasis cities. Fortifications dotted the landscape, silent sentinels watching over the ebb and flow of humanity. The constant threat of nomadic raids, while a nuisance to merchants, also prompted empires to maintain a military presence, inadvertently contributing to the security of the routes at times. The centuries between the fall of the Han and the rise of the Mongols were a dynamic and complex period for the Silk Road. It was a time of both fragmentation and integration, of conflict and cooperation. The decline of monolithic empires did not spell the end of the trade, but rather its transformation. It became more resilient, more adaptable, and arguably even richer in its cultural exchange, as a multitude of actors, Sogdians, Byzantines, Sasanians, Arabs, and various nomadic groups each contributed their unique threads to the ever-evolving tapestry of the Silk Road. The routes themselves, etched into the landscape by countless footsteps and hooves, continued to whisper stories of distant lands, of fortunes made and lost, and of the enduring human desire to connect, to trade, and to explore. The echoes of these caravans, laden with silk and spices, knowledge and faith, still resonate across the vast heart of Eurasia, a testament to an interconnected world long before the age of global communication. The winds of change, often heralded by the rumble of distant hooves, began to stir across the vast steppes of Central Asia. For centuries, the Silk Road had been a tapestry woven with threads of diverse cultures. But it was also a network perpetually vulnerable to the whims of local rulers, the rise and fall of empires, and the ever-present threat of banditry. Merchants, though driven by the allure of profit, navigated a world where safety was a fleeting luxury. And the journey itself was a testament to their daring. Then, in the early 13th century, a force unlike any seen before emerged from the heart of Mongolia. Under the charismatic leadership of Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, disparate nomadic tribes were forged into a formidable, unified power. His vision was not merely conquest, but the establishment of a vast, interconnected realm, where order and law would supersede the chaos that had long plagued the caravan routes. The Mongol unification was a seismic event, its repercussions echoing across continents and fundamentally reshaping the arteries of trade. Before Genghis Khan, the steppes were a patchwork of warring clans, each with their own territorial claims and often hostile to outsiders. Travel across these lands was a perilous endeavor, demanding heavy tolls and constant vigilance. But with the rise of the Mongol Empire, a new paradigm emerged, the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. This was not peace born of gentle persuasion, but rather one enforced with an iron fist. The Mongols, having conquered an unprecedented expanse of territory from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, understood the strategic importance of trade. They recognized that a stable, secure network of routes would not only enrich their empire, but also facilitate the movement of armies, information, and ideas. Under this new order, the Silk Road experienced a golden age of sorts. The fragmented tolls and arbitrary taxes imposed by local warlords were largely replaced by a standardized system of taxation. More importantly, the Mongols actively protected the trade routes. Patrols of fierce cavalry policed the vast stretches of desert and mountain passes, deterring bandits and ensuring the safety of caravans. Merchants, who once traveled in large, heavily armed convoys for protection, now found themselves traversing these same routes with a newfound sense of security. The fear of ambush, though never entirely absent, diminished significantly, allowing for smaller, more frequent expeditions. This unprecedented period of safety and stability had a profound impact on the volume and diversity of goods exchanged. Luxury items like silk, spices, and precious stones continued to flow, but the Pax Mongolica also facilitated the movement of bulkier goods, such as textiles, ceramics, and even agricultural products, which had previously been too risky or costly to transport over long distances. The sheer scale of the Mongol Empire meant that goods could travel from one end of Eurasia to the other without ever leaving Mongol jurisdiction, creating a seamless economic zone that dwarfed any previous empire. Consider the journey of Marco Polo, whose travels through the Mongol Empire in the late 13th century became legendary. His accounts vividly describe the efficiency and security of the Mongol postal system, known as the Yam. This network of relay stations, spaced every 25 to 30 miles, allowed for rapid communication and the swift movement of officials and goods. At each station, fresh horses and provisions were available, enabling messengers to cover vast distances at incredible speeds. While primarily designed for military and administrative purposes, the Yam system indirectly benefited merchants, demonstrating the Mongols' commitment to infrastructure and connectivity. Marco Polo himself, traveling under the protection of the Great Khan, was able to journey across the entire breadth of Asia, an undertaking that would have been unimaginable just a century earlier. But the influence of the Pax Mongolica extended far beyond mere goods. It became a conduit for the exchange of knowledge, technology, and culture on an unprecedented scale. Scholars, artists, and artisans traveled freely across the empire, sharing their expertise and contributing to a vibrant intellectual cross-pollination. Chinese innovations like gunpowder, printing, and the compass, already known in the East, began to make their way westward, profoundly influencing European development. Similarly, Persian astronomy and medicine found new audiences in the East, enriching the intellectual landscape of the Mongol court. One of the lesser-known aspects of this era is the deliberate relocation of skilled craftsmen and intellectuals by the Mongols. When they conquered a city, particularly one renowned for its artistic or technical prowess, they would often spare the lives of its skilled inhabitants and transport them to other parts of the empire where their talents could be put to use. This policy, though born of conquest, inadvertently fostered a remarkable fusion of artistic styles and technological advancements. Imagine a Persian architect working alongside a Chinese engineer, or a European metalworker learning techniques from an Indian artisan. Such scenarios, while not always documented in detail, were certainly possible and even encouraged under the Mongol umbrella. However, historians still debate the precise extent to which the Mongols actively promoted cultural exchange versus simply facilitating it through their imposition of order. Was it a conscious policy to foster a cosmopolitan empire, Or was it an incidental outcome of their desire for efficient administration and economic gain? Some scholars argue that the Mongols, being pragmatic rulers, understood the benefits of cultural diversity and actively sought to integrate different traditions into their imperial fabric. Others contend that their primary motivation was practical control and resource extraction, and that cultural exchange was merely a byproduct of their vast territorial reach and the subsequent ease of movement. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of strategic calculation and unintended consequences. The impact of the Pax Mongolica on the Silk Road was transformative. It didn't just make trade safer, it fundamentally altered the perception of distance and possibility. For the first time in centuries, the single political entity governed a continuous landmass stretching across Eurasia, creating a unified market and a shared cultural space. This unification allowed for the transmission of diseases as well, a somber counterpoint to the flourishing trade. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the mid-14th century, is believed to have originated in Central Asia and travelled westward along these very trade routes, carried by infected rats and fleas within merchant caravans. This tragic consequence underscores the double-edged nature of increased connectivity. While it brought prosperity and innovation, it also facilitated the spread of pathogens on an unprecedented scale. The Mongol Empire, despite its immense power and reach, was not eternal. Internal strife, succession disputes, and the sheer logistical challenges of governing such a vast territory eventually led to its fragmentation. By the late 14th century, the unified empire had fractured into several successor states, such as the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty in China. While these successor states often maintained some semblance of the Mongol legal and administrative systems, the overarching unity and the centralized protection of the Silk Road began to wane. As the Mongol successor states grew increasingly independent and, at times, hostile towards one another, the Pax Mongolica gradually eroded. The safe passage that merchants had enjoyed for nearly a century became less assured. Local rulers, once Ain, began to impose their own tolls and regulations, and the threat of banditry resurfaced in many regions. The seamless flow of goods and ideas that characterized the Mongol era started to falter, giving way to a more fragmented and perilous landscape. Yet, the legacy of the Pax Mongolica endured. The routes themselves, once firmly established and heavily trafficked, remained etched into the landscape. The knowledge and technologies exchanged during this period had already taken root in distant lands, continuing to influence development long after the empire's decline. The maps and geographical understanding gained during the Mongol era, for instance, proved invaluable for later explorers and cartographers, providing a more accurate picture of the Eurasian landmass. Even as the political unity dissolved, the memory of a time when one could travel from Beijing to Baghdad with relative ease persisted, a testament to the profound impact of centralized power on global connectivity. The Silk Road, ever resilient, adapted once more. It continued to function, albeit with greater difficulty and risk, as merchants, driven by the enduring demand for exotic goods and the promise of profit, found new ways to navigate the shifting political landscape. The age of unprecedented safety and expansion under the Mongols had passed, but it had irrevocably altered the course of history, demonstrating the immense power of interconnectedness and leaving an indelible mark on the global tapestry of trade and culture. The whispers of the desert winds, though no longer carrying the unified decrees of a single Khan, still echoed with the memory of a time when East and West were bound together by a common, if sometimes fearsome, hand. As the tapestry of the Silk Road continued to weave its intricate patterns across continents, a new thread began to emerge from the distant lands of the West. While the East had long been a beacon of innovation and wealth, its existence remained largely a matter of rumor and legend in the minds of many Europeans. The Crusades, though primarily religious conflicts, had inadvertently opened small windows to the opulent world of the Levant, stirring a nascent curiosity for the exotic goods and fabled kingdoms that lay beyond. Yet it was not until the late 13th century that a figure would emerge whose journeys would etch the East into the European consciousness with an unprecedented vividness: Marco Polo. Born into a Venetian merchant family in 1254, Marco Polo was not the first European to venture along the Silk Road. Indeed, his father, Niccolo, and uncle, Maffeo, had already undertaken a remarkable journey to the court of Kublai Khan, the formidable Mongol emperor of China, returning with tales of unimaginable riches and a request from the Khan himself for 100 learned men and some holy oil from Jerusalem. This initial encounter laid the groundwork for Marco's own epic voyage, which began in 1271 when he was just 17 years old. He, along with his father and uncle, set out from Venice, embarking on a journey that would span over 2 decades and traverse the vast and diverse landscapes of Asia. Their path was not a direct one, but a meandering odyssey across deserts, mountains, and bustling cities. They travelled through Persia, a land of ancient empires and exquisite artistry, where they marvelled at the intricate tilework of mosques and the vibrant colours of Persian miniatures. They ventured through the Pamir Mountains, often called the roof of the world, where the air grew thin and cold, and the silence of the high altitudes was broken only by the whistling wind. Marco Polo's descriptions of these regions, though sometimes embellished for his audience, offered Europeans their first comprehensive glimpse into the geography and cultures of Central Asia. He spoke of the Old Man of the Mountain, the legendary leader of the Nizari Ismaili sect, whose fortress in Alamat had long been a source of both fear and fascination in the West, though by Polo's time it had already been destroyed by the Mongols. This detail, almost a footnote in his grand narrative, hints at the layers of history and legend that crisscrossed the Silk Road. The Polos eventually reached the court of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, in Shangdu, a summer palace often romanticized as Xanadu. Here, Marco Polo found not a barbarian chieftain, but a sophisticated and powerful emperor who presided over an empire of unparalleled scale and organization. Kublai Khan, a shrewd and curious ruler, took a particular liking to young Marco, recognizing his intelligence and linguistic abilities. Marco served the Khan for 17 years, not merely as a merchant, but as an emissary, an administrator, and even a tax collector in various parts of the vast Mongol Empire. He traveled extensively within China, observing its advanced civilization with an outsider's keen eye. His accounts of China were revolutionary for Europeans. He described bustling cities like Hangzhou, which he claimed was beyond dispute the finest and noblest city in the world, with its intricate canal systems, vibrant markets, and thriving industries. He marveled at the widespread use of paper money, a concept virtually unknown in Europe at the time, and the efficiency of the imperial postal system, which allowed messages to travel across thousands of miles with remarkable speed. He spoke of the Grand Canal, a monumental feat of engineering that connected the northern and southern parts of the empire, facilitating trade and communication. He detailed the use of coal as a common fuel, a practice that would not become widespread in Europe for centuries. These observations, meticulously recorded and later compiled into his famous book Il Milione, The Million, or The Travels of Marco Polo, painted a picture of a civilization far more advanced and populous than anything known in Europe. One of the more obscure details he noted was the use of asbestos, which he described as a salamander cloth that could withstand fire. While his explanation of its origin was mythical, his observation of its properties was accurate, showcasing his keen eye for unusual materials and technologies. This kind of detail, woven into his broader narrative, lent a sense of authenticity to his extraordinary claims. However, Marco Polo's tales were not universally accepted in Europe. Many found his descriptions so outlandish, so far beyond their own experiences, that they dismissed them as fabrications. He was often nicknamed Marco Millions, not just for the vast sums he was said to have encountered, but for the millions of lies he was accused of telling. This skepticism highlights a scholarly dispute that continues to this day. How much of Marco Polo's account is truly factual, and how much is embellished or even entirely fabricated? While modern scholarship largely affirms the veracity of his core journey and his presence in China, some historians still point to certain omissions or inconsistencies in his writings. For instance, he never mentioned the Great Wall of China, tea, or foot binding, all prominent features of Chinese life during his time. This has led some to speculate that he might not have travelled as extensively within China as he claimed, or perhaps his observations were limited by his role and the specific regions he visited. Others argue that the Great Wall, as we know it today, was largely built during the Ming dynasty after Polo's time, and that tea and foot binding might not have been as universally prominent or noteworthy to a foreign observer as we assume in retrospect. This ongoing debate adds a layer of intrigue to his legacy, reminding us that historical narratives are often complex and open to interpretation. Despite the skepticism, The Travels of Marco Polo became an immensely popular book, circulating widely in manuscript form throughout Europe. It was more than just a travelogue. It was a window into a world of unimaginable wealth, exotic cultures, and advanced civilizations. It ignited the European imagination, fostering a thirst for discovery and a desire to connect directly with the fabled lands of the East. The book served as a crucial source of geographical and cultural information for future generations of explorers, most notably Christopher Columbus, who famously carried a heavily annotated copy of Polo's work with him on his voyages across the Atlantic. The return of the Polos to Venice in 1295, after 24 years, was as dramatic as their departure. They were reportedly so dishevelled and their clothes so worn that their own relatives did not recognize them. Only after they revealed the precious jewels sewn into the linings of their old garments were they finally believed. This dramatic re-entry into Venetian society underscored the extraordinary nature of their journey and the immense wealth they had accumulated. Marco Polo's narrative, therefore, served as a powerful catalyst. It transformed the vague rumours of the East into tangible, albeit sometimes exaggerated, descriptions. It painted a picture of a world rich in spices, silks, precious stones, and innovative technologies. A world ripe for trade and eventually for exploration. The Silk Road, which had for centuries been the exclusive domain of Asian merchants and caravans, now beckoned to European adventurers with renewed urgency. The impact of Marco Polo's journey and his book extended beyond mere curiosity. It fueled the nascent ambitions of European maritime powers. The overland Silk Road, while still vital, was fraught with political instability, banditry, and the ever-present threat of disease. Here in the 14th and 15th centuries further complicated overland routes, as they increasingly controlled the traditional pathways to the east, imposing heavy taxes and sometimes outright blocking trade. This growing difficulty in accessing eastern goods via land routes, coupled with the allure of direct access to the sources of wealth described by Polo, spurred European nations to seek alternative, sea-based routes to Asia. The Portuguese, pioneers in maritime exploration, began to systematically explore the African coast in the 15th century. Driven by a desire to bypass the Ottoman intermediaries and establish direct trade links with the spice-rich lands of the East. Bartolomé Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, opening up the possibility of a sea route around Africa. A decade later, Vasco da Gama successfully navigated this route, reaching Calicut in India in 1498, thus establishing the first direct sea link between Europe and Asia. This monumental achievement marked a significant turning point in the history of global trade, effectively creating a maritime Silk Road that would eventually overshadow the traditional overland routes. Meanwhile, inspired by Polo's descriptions of Chipangu, Japan, and the vast riches of the East, Christopher Columbus, though ultimately misguided in his geographical calculations, set sail westward in 1492, convinced he could reach Asia by crossing the Atlantic. While he famously stumbled upon the Americas instead, his voyages, directly influenced by the tales of Marco Polo, irrevocably altered the course of world history, inaugurating the Age of Discovery and the Columbian Exchange. The legacy of Marco Polo, therefore, is multifaceted. He was a merchant, an explorer, and a storyteller whose personal narrative bridged the vast cultural and geographical divide between East and West. His travels were not just a collection of anecdotes. They were a foundational text that shaped European perceptions of Asia for centuries. They demystified some aspects of the East while simultaneously enhancing its mystique, creating a powerful impetus for further exploration and trade. The Silk Road, in its essence, was about connection. The movement of goods, ideas, technologies, and people across vast distances. Marco Polo's journey exemplifies this spirit of connection, albeit from a European perspective. He brought back not just silks and spices, but stories and knowledge that profoundly impacted the Western world. His accounts, however fantastic they might have seemed at the time, laid the intellectual and psychological groundwork for the age of exploration, redirecting European ambitions towards the East and forever changing the global map of trade and power. As the 14th and 15th centuries unfolded, the political landscape along the traditional Silk Road continued to shift. The Mongol Empire, which had provided a period of relative stability and facilitated trade during the Pax Mongolica, began to fragment into various successor states. While these successor states, such as the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, and the Chagatai Khanate still maintained some degree of trade, the unified political control that had once guaranteed the safety of merchants diminished. This fragmentation, coupled with the rise of new regional powers and increasing internal conflicts, made overland travel more perilous and less predictable. The once thriving caravanserai, which had dotted the routes like pearls on a string, sometimes fell into disrepair or became targets for bandits. The vibrant exchange of goods and ideas continued, but often under more challenging circumstances. Yet the allure of the East remained undiminished. The demand for luxury goods, the exquisite silks of China, the aromatic spices of India and Southeast Asia, the precious jewels of Persia, continued to drive merchants and adventurers. The tales of Marco Polo had only intensified this desire, painting vivid pictures of the wealth that awaited those brave enough to seek it. The West, having glimpsed the wonders of the Orient through Polo's eyes, was now determined to find a more reliable and direct path to these riches. This shift in focus from overland to maritime routes did not mean the immediate demise of the Silk Road. The traditional routes continued to function, albeit with varying degrees of intensity and safety, for centuries to come. Local and regional trade networks persisted, and goods still flowed between different parts of Asia. However, the grand narrative of global trade was beginning to pivot. The oceans, once seen as impassable barriers, were now becoming highways, offering new possibilities for connecting distant lands. The era of Marco Polo, therefore, represents a pivotal moment in the long and winding history of the Silk Road. It was a period where the East, long a distant and somewhat mythical entity for Europeans, became a tangible, if still exotic, reality. It was a time when the seeds of European global expansion were sown, watered by the tantalizing tales of a Venetian merchant and nurtured by the growing ambition of maritime powers. The Silk Road, in its broadest sense, was not just a physical path, but a conduit for dreams, desires, and the relentless human drive to explore, connect, and prosper. It whispered stories of distant lands, and in the late 13th century, one man listened more closely than most, bringing those whispers back to a continent eager to hear them. The desert winds, once laden with the scent of spices and the murmur of distant tongues, began to carry a different message. A subtle shift in the global currents, like an imperceptible change in the Earth's axis, was slowly but surely altering the very landscape of trade. The Silk Roads, for centuries the arteries of the world, were not severed overnight, but rather their prominence began to wane, much like a river slowly changing its course. This was not a sudden cataclysm, but a gradual reorientation, a slow turning away from the familiar paths towards new horizons. The Mongol Empire, whose vast expanse had, for a time, unified much of the Silk Road under a single, albeit often brutal authority, eventually fragmented. The Pax Mongolica, which had facilitated such unprecedented ease of travel and trade across Eurasia, dissolved into a patchwork of smaller khanates and successor states. This fragmentation brought with it renewed instability. Where once a single passport might have sufficed for a journey from Beijing to Baghdad, now merchants faced a multitude of borders, each with its own tolls, taxes, and potential dangers. The political landscape grew more complex, more fractured, and consequently less inviting for the long, arduous overland journeys. Bandits, always a shadow on the periphery, became bolder, and the protection offered by unified empires diminished. The cost of travel, both in terms of money and risk, began to outweigh the potential rewards for many. Simultaneously, the world was on the cusp of a profound transformation in maritime technology and exploration. For centuries, sailing had been a perilous endeavor, hugging coastlines or relying on predictable monsoon winds. But by the late 14th and early 15th centuries, European navigators, driven by a thirst for wealth, knowledge, and a desire to bypass the increasingly expensive and politically fraught overland routes controlled by intermediaries, began to push the boundaries of what was thought possible. The development of the caravel, a small, highly maneuverable sailing ship with lateen sails, allowed for faster, more efficient travel, even against the wind. Advances in cartography, navigation instruments like the astrolabe and compass, and a deeper understanding of ocean currents and winds, all contributed to a burgeoning confidence in venturing into the unknown. The Portuguese, pioneers in this maritime revolution, began to systematically explore the West African coast, gradually pushing further and further south. Their ultimate goal was to find a sea route to the fabled Spice Islands of the East, bypassing the Ottoman Empire and the Venetian monopolies that controlled the flow of goods through the Mediterranean. In 1488, Bartolomé Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope, a monumental achievement that proved a sea route around Africa was indeed possible. Just a decade later, in 1498, Vasco da Gama successfully reached Calicut in India, establishing a direct maritime link between Europe and Asia. This single voyage, more than any other, signaled a fundamental shift in global trade. Suddenly, the immense distances of the Silk Road, the treacherous mountains and vast deserts, the numerous middlemen and their levies seemed less appealing compared to the relative ease and cost-effectiveness of sea travel. The sea lanes offered several undeniable advantages. Ships could carry vastly greater quantities of goods than caravans, reducing the per-unit cost of transport. They were less vulnerable to banditry, though piracy remained a threat, and less subject to the vagaries of shifting political alliances on land. The journey, while still long and dangerous, became more predictable in its duration and less dependent on the goodwill of countless local rulers. The allure of the ocean, once a barrier, transformed into a highway. This maritime expansion was not limited to the Europeans. Across the Indian Ocean, Arab, Indian, and Chinese merchants had long plied the waters, creating a vibrant network of sea trade that predated and ran parallel to the overland Silk Roads. The Chinese admiral Zhang, in the early 15th century, led a series of 7 monumental expeditions, sailing his massive treasure ships as far as East Africa. These voyages, predating European exploration by decades, showcased China's immense naval power and technological prowess. While Zheng He's expeditions were primarily diplomatic and demonstrative of imperial power rather than purely commercial, they underscored the viability and potential of large-scale maritime trade. Historians still debate the true motivations behind the abrupt cessation of these grand voyages after Zheng He's death. Was it a shift in imperial priorities, a renewed focus on internal affairs and land defense, or perhaps a perception that the costs outweighed the benefits? The answer remains elusive, a tantalizing mystery in the annals of Chinese history. As the sea routes gained prominence, the focus of global power and wealth began to shift. Port cities like Lisbon, Antwerp, and later London and Amsterdam rose to prominence, becoming the new hubs of international commerce, eclipsing the ancient caravan cities of Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar. The goods that once traversed the Silk Road, silk, spices, porcelain now arrived in Europe by ship, often directly from their places of origin, bypassing the traditional overland intermediaries. This economic reorientation had profound consequences for the communities and cultures that had thrived along the Silk Road for millennia. Many cities, once bustling centers of trade and cultural exchange, found their lifelines gradually diminishing. They did not vanish, but their golden age, fueled by the relentless flow of caravans, slowly faded into memory. Internal conflicts also played a significant role in the decline of the overland routes. In Persia, the rise of the Safavid Empire in the early 16th century, with its zealous Shia Islam, often brought it into conflict with the Sunni Ottoman Empire to its west and the Mongol Empire to its east. These geopolitical rivalries frequently led to border closures, trade embargoes, and outright warfare, making transit through these crucial regions perilous and unreliable. Merchants, caught between warring empires, found their livelihoods threatened and their journeys interrupted. The political fragmentation and religious strife created a climate of uncertainty that was inimical to long-distance trade. Similarly, in Central Asia, the decline of the unified Mongol successor states led to the emergence of numerous smaller khanates, often engaged in internecine warfare. The once relatively safe passage through these lands became fraught with danger. The lucrative slave trade, which had been a dark undercurrent of the Silk Road, also contributed to instability, as raiding and kidnapping became more prevalent in certain regions. The very infrastructure that supported the Silk Road, the caravanserai, the wells, the guarded passes, fell into disrepair as the central authorities weakened and the flow of traffic diminished. The Ming dynasty in China, which followed the Yuan Mongol dynasty, also adopted a more isolationist policy, particularly after the grand voyages of Zhang. While trade continued, especially with Southeast Asia and Japan, the emphasis shifted away from extensive overland connections with the West. The Great Wall, a symbol of China's historical defense against northern incursions, also represented a certain inward-looking tendency, prioritizing internal stability and agrarian self-sufficiency over extensive foreign trade. This is not to say China completely closed its doors, but the vibrant, open exchange that characterized earlier periods of the Silk Road diminished significantly. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the transformation was largely complete. The maritime routes, often dubbed the spice routes or sea silk roads, had become the dominant arteries of global commerce. The age of exploration had given way to the age of empires, fueled by colonial expansion and the vast wealth generated by sea trade. The Silk Roads, while never entirely abandoned, receded into the background, becoming routes for local and regional exchange, rather than the primary conduits for intercontinental commerce. Yet, even in their decline, the Silk Roads left an indelible mark. The cultural exchanges they facilitated had already woven a rich tapestry of ideas, technologies, and beliefs across Eurasia. Buddhism had traveled from India to China, Islam had spread across Central Asia, and countless innovations, from papermaking to gunpowder, had made their way from east to west. The legacy of these ancient pathways was not merely economic, it was profoundly cultural and intellectual. The echoes of those journeys, the whispers of ancient tongues, and the scent of distant lands remained embedded in the very fabric of the societies that had once flourished along their length. Perhaps these ancient pathways never truly died, but rather transformed, their spirit living on in the interconnectedness of our modern world. The idea of a global network of distant lands linked by shared commerce and culture was born on the Silk Roads. They laid the groundwork for the globalized world we inhabit today. A world where goods and ideas still traverse vast distances, albeit now through digital networks and modern transportation. The caravans may have faded into the desert sands, but the spirit of connection, of seeking the unknown and sharing its bounty, endures. The memory of their passage remains, a reminder of a time when the world was both vast and intimately connected by the footsteps of countless travelers. As the great caravans faded into memory and the winds of change swept across the vast Eurasian landmass, the Silk Road, in its traditional form, began to recede from the forefront of global commerce. Yet, to imagine its influence simply vanished with the decline of camel trains and the rise of maritime routes would be to misunderstand the profound and lasting legacy it etched upon the world. The threads, woven by centuries of exchange, were too deeply intertwined with the fabric of human civilization to ever truly unravel. The very concept of a globalized world, a world interconnected by trade and shared knowledge, found its earliest and most powerful expression along these ancient paths. Even as the sea lanes offered swifter, higher volume transport, the ideas, technologies, and cultural practices that had diffused along the Silk Road continued their journey, shaping societies far removed from the desert oases and mountain passes. Consider the enduring impact on technology. Papermaking, a Chinese innovation dating back to at least the 2nd century CE, travelled westward along the Silk Road. It reached Samarkand by the 8th century, where Arab scholars learned the craft, and from there it spread to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe. Before paper, scribes in Europe relied on expensive parchment or vellum, limiting the dissemination of knowledge. The arrival of paper revolutionized record-keeping, administration, and, most significantly, the spread of literacy and learning. Without the Silk Road, the European Renaissance, with its explosion of printed books, might have been a very different and much slower affair. Gunpowder, another transformative Chinese invention, followed a similar trajectory. Developed for fireworks and medicinal purposes in China around the 9th century, its military applications were soon realized. By the 13th century, during the Mongol expansion, knowledge of gunpowder and its use in rudimentary firearms reached the Middle East and Europe. This single invention irrevocably altered the nature of warfare, leading to the development of cannons and muskets that would dominate battlefields for centuries, fundamentally changing political power structures across continents. Beyond these monumental inventions, countless other innovations, both grand and subtle, made their way across the Silk Road. Agricultural techniques, irrigation methods, new crops like peaches, apricots, and citrus fruits, as well as cultivation practices, enriched diets and economies from east to west. The sophisticated astronomical instruments developed in Persia and the Islamic world, which built upon earlier Greek and Indian knowledge, were themselves products of this cross-cultural fertilization, later influencing European astronomy. The economic systems that underpin modern global trade also bear the imprint of the Silk Road. The concept of letters of credit, or suftaja as they were known in the Islamic world, allowed merchants to transfer large sums of money without carrying heavy and dangerous quantities of gold or silver. This system, which emerged along the Silk Road to facilitate long-distance trade, was a precursor to modern banking and financial instruments. It fostered trust and enabled transactions across vast distances, laying groundwork for the complex financial networks we see today. The very idea of an international market, where goods from diverse origins are traded and valued, was honed and perfected along these routes. Culturally, the legacy is perhaps even more pervasive, though often less tangible. The Silk Road was a conduit for religions, philosophies, and artistic styles. Buddhism, originating in India, spread eastward along these routes, transforming the spiritual landscape of Central Asia, China, Korea, and Japan. The magnificent cave temples of Dunhuang, adorned with vibrant murals and sculptures, stand as a testament to this religious and artistic transmission, blending Indian, Central Asian, and Chinese artistic traditions into a unique visual language. Similarly, Christianity in its Nestorian form found a foothold in China, and Islam spread westward from its Arabian heartland, profoundly shaping the cultures of Central Asia and beyond. Artistic motifs and techniques traveled just as freely. Persian miniature painting, with its intricate details and rich colors, influenced manuscript illumination in India, and even aspects of Chinese painting. Chinese porcelain, with its exquisite craftsmanship, captivated markets across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, inspiring local imitations and driving innovation in ceramic production. The very concept of chinoiserie in European art and design, a fascination with East Asian aesthetics, is a direct descendant of these early encounters. Language itself was shaped by the Silk Road. Loanwords, grammatical structures, and even entire scripts diffused across regions. The Uyghur script, for instance, derived from the Aramaic script, was adopted by the Mongols and became the basis for the classical Mongolian script, illustrating the complex linguistic tapestry woven along the routes. One lesser-known detail that highlights the enduring cultural exchange is the journey of playing cards. While their exact origin is debated, many scholars believe they originated in China during the Tang dynasty, 7th to 10th centuries CE, and traveled westward through the Islamic world, reaching Europe by the late 14th century. From simple paper leaves used for games and divination, they evolved into the diverse decks we know today, a testament to how even seemingly trivial cultural artifacts can traverse continents and centuries, adapting and transforming along the way. The decline of the overland Silk Road was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual shift influenced by a confluence of factors. The rise of powerful, centralized empires like the Ottoman and Safavid dynasties in the west and the Ming dynasty in the east often led to increased taxation, protectionism, and sometimes outright hostility towards foreign merchants. These empires, while powerful, sometimes prioritized internal stability and control over the free flow of goods and ideas that characterized earlier periods. However, the most significant factor in the shift away from overland routes was the burgeoning age of maritime exploration. By the 15th and 16th centuries, European powers, driven by a desire to bypass the middlemen of the Middle East and access the lucrative markets of Asia directly, began to navigate the oceans. Vasco da Gama's circumnavigation of Africa in 1498, opening a direct sea route to India, marked a pivotal moment. Suddenly, goods could be transported in much larger quantities, more cheaply, and often more safely by sea than by the arduous overland journey. This maritime revolution effectively rerouted the arteries of global trade, diminishing the prominence of the ancient Silk Road. Yet, historians still debate the precise extent to which the maritime routes replaced the Silk Road versus merely supplemented it. While the grand, long-distance caravans certainly dwindled, regional trade along segments of the Silk Road continued for centuries, adapting to local needs and political realities. The notion of a complete and abrupt death of the Silk Road is perhaps too simplistic. Instead, it transformed, its essence absorbed into new forms of global interaction. Even today, the echoes of the Silk Road resonate. The very idea of East meets West, a shorthand for cultural and economic interaction between Asia and Europe, is a concept born from the centuries of exchange along these routes. The modern resurgence of interest in connectivity, exemplified by China's Belt and Road Initiative, consciously harks back to the historical precedent of the Silk Road, seeking to revive and reimagine its spirit of global integration, albeit with 21st century infrastructure and geopolitical ambitions. The Silk Road, therefore, was more than just a collection of trade routes. It was a dynamic, living network that fostered an unprecedented era of cultural diffusion, technological exchange, and economic interdependence. It laid the groundwork for the modern globalized world, demonstrating humanity's innate drive to connect, to explore, and to share. Its legacy is not just in the artifacts discovered in archaeological digs, but in the very fabric of our societies, in the foods we eat, the languages we speak, the technologies we use, and the philosophies that shape our understanding of the world. As we reflect on its long and winding journey, from its humble beginnings to its eventual transformation, we are left with a profound sense of wonder at the sheer scale of human endeavor and the enduring power of connection. The Silk Road reminds us that seemingly disparate cultures are often deeply interwoven, their histories rich with shared experiences and mutual influences. It whispers stories of merchants braving desolate deserts, scholars exchanging ancient texts, and artists sharing their visions across vast distances, all contributing to a tapestry of human civilization that continues to unfold. And perhaps, as the stars twinkle over the ancient paths, they still bear witness to the invisible threads that continue to bind us all. Threads spun from silk, spice, and the enduring human spirit of exploration and exchange. The echoes of the Silk Road, though muted by centuries, resonate profoundly in our modern world, shaping our understanding of global interconnectedness and inspiring new initiatives. It's a testament to the enduring human impulse for connection, for the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures, that a network born of ancient necessity continues to inform contemporary thought. The very concept of a globalized economy, where goods traverse vast distances and cultures intermingle, finds its historical roots in the paths carved by camel caravans and sailing ships. Consider the Belt and Road Initiative, a monumental undertaking launched by China in 2013. This ambitious project, often referred to as the New Silk Road, seeks to revive and expand ancient trade routes, both overland and maritime, connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe. It envisions a vast infrastructure network: railways, ports, pipelines, and digital highways, designed to facilitate trade, investment, and cultural exchange. The scale of this modern endeavor, with its multi-trillion-dollar investments and involvement of over 100 countries, dwarfs even the most extensive ancient Silk Road networks. Yet the underlying principle remains remarkably similar: to foster prosperity through enhanced connectivity. Just as Zhang Qian's initial expeditions sought to establish alliances and open trade, the Belt and Road Initiative aims to forge new partnerships and economic corridors. However, unlike the organic growth of the ancient Silk Road, which evolved over millennia through the cumulative efforts of countless individuals and communities, the modern initiative is a centrally planned and state-driven project. This difference in genesis leads to different challenges and controversies. While the ancient roots adapted to political shifts and geographical realities, the modern initiative faces geopolitical complexities, debt sustainability concerns for participating nations, and environmental impacts on a scale unimaginable to ancient traders. Historians and economists still debate the long-term implications of the Belt and Road Initiative, questioning whether it will truly foster equitable development or primarily serve the strategic interests of its primary proponent. The ancient Silk Road, for all its challenges, was largely a story of mutual benefit, albeit often unequal, driven by demand and supply. The modern iteration, with its top-down structure, invites a different kind of scrutiny. Beyond grand geopolitical projects, the spirit of the Silk Road lives on in smaller yet equally significant ways. Think of the modern global supply chain that brings a coffee bean from Brazil to a cup in London, or a microchip from Taiwan to a smartphone assembled in Vietnam. These intricate networks, powered by container ships, cargo planes, and digital logistics, are the direct descendants of the ancient trade routes. The fundamental desire for goods not available locally, the pursuit of exotic luxuries, or the necessity of vital resources remains unchanged. The Silk Road taught us that distance is not an insurmountable barrier to commerce, and that a thirst for the other can drive innovation and connection. The cultural exchange fostered by the ancient Silk Road also finds its modern parallel. The Internet, in its essence, is a digital Silk Road, facilitating the instantaneous transmission of ideas, art, music, and philosophies across continents. A musician in Mali can share their unique rhythms with an audience in Japan. A philosopher in India can engage in dialogue with scholars in Europe, and a fashion designer in Paris can draw inspiration from traditional textiles found in Uzbekistan. This free flow of information and cultural expression mirrors the way Buddhism spread from India to China, how papermaking technology traveled westward, or how Persian artistic motifs influenced European aesthetics. The speed and scale are vastly different, but the fundamental act of sharing and influencing remains the same. Consider the enduring fascination with the Silk Road itself. Museums across the world dedicate exhibitions to its artifacts. Scholarly conferences dissect its history, and popular culture romanticizes its adventurous spirit. This continued interest isn't merely historical curiosity. It's a recognition of the Silk Road's profound impact on the trajectory of human civilization. It reminds us that our interconnectedness is not a recent phenomenon, but a deep-seated aspect of our shared human story. The very concept of East meets West, while often oversimplified, was forged on these ancient paths. One lesser-known detail about the Silk Road's modern echo lies in the rediscovery and preservation of its physical remnants. In the early 20th century, archaeologists and explorers like Aurel Stein meticulously documented and excavated forgotten cities and Buddhist cave complexes along the Taklamakan Desert. Their findings, including ancient manuscripts, murals, and textiles, not only shed light on the vibrant cultures that once thrived there, but also sparked an international effort to preserve these fragile historical sites. Today, organizations like UNESCO work with local governments to protect and restore these tangible links to the past, recognizing their universal value. This ongoing work, often in remote and challenging environments, is a direct continuation of the ancient roots' legacy, ensuring that future generations can still walk, metaphorically or literally, in the footsteps of ancient traders and pilgrims. The very concept of global citizenship, or intercultural understanding, is deeply rooted in the lessons of the Silk Road. It demonstrated, often through hardship and conflict, that diverse peoples could coexist, trade, and even thrive by understanding and adapting to each other's customs and beliefs. The cosmopolitan cities that flourished along the routes, like Samarkand or Dunhuan, were melting